Welcome back to Humanitarian Horizons. I'm your host, Christina DiArcangelo. Today's episode is the part one of the backstory behind my book, Rescuing Mom, which really is about the crime that was committed against my mom, Paula DiArcangelo. I have recorded several podcasts about the crime itself and the different components of the crime and then the process of the justice system. And then I've spoken about the book. But one thing I realized as I was reflecting on some of this was that I never talked about the backstory behind the book. So the whole investigation part of it. So this story isn't just about my mother. This story is about what happens when the system that's supposed to protect our most vulnerable, our parents, our elders, fail. It's a story about what happens when love forces you to step into the darkness and because no one else will. And this all began March 24th of 2022. This is a day in my life that I will never, ever forget. There have been several times in my life that there are things that have occurred that I will never forget. One of them being the day my father died. That night, actually, it was nighttime when he died. I'll never forget the night my uncle was on the last part of his life, and he shortly died thereafter. I'll never forget my brother's death. I will never forget my separation and the divorce and all those proceedings and the dates associated therewith. I'll never forget when I dropped my brand. I am Christina DiArcangelo, or when I started doing my podcasts. I'll never forget the day my brother took his last breath. I'll never forget the time that my mom passed either. None of these things I'll never ever be able to forget. And most importantly, I'll never forget the day my son was born. That was one of the best days of my life. So let's begin with how this all started, just as a reminder. I will never forget the moment that my sister-in-law reached out to me and basically said that she overheard on a phone call that my mother was screaming for help, and there had been an unidentified male that was screaming at my mother, and then she heard a loud, chilling bang. That moment, that sound is something that my sister-in-law will never forget. And unfortunately, she had to tell me all these things. So with that being said, we talked about it and we decided that the best course of action would be to call 911. Little did I know that making this call, this 911 call, would become the catalyst for unraveling a crime that had been hidden in plain sight. But after the officers went home, no one contacted me. So I called 911. 911 dispatched East Pikeland Police Department. They came out. They rescued my mom from the basement and they had her transported via ambulance to Tower Hospital in Phoenixville. I knew nothing. I called Phoenixville Hospital and said, "Hey, my name is Christina DiArcangelo. I understand that you may have received my mom via an ambulance. I don't really know what's going on, but can you please let my mom know that I was the one who called 911 for her to see if I could be HIPAA consented in so we can start talking about what's happening with my mom? If she's there, can you please let me know?" So the hospital confirmed after checking with my mom that yes, I could be told information and that my mom consented me HIPAA, and I was advised that they were working on my mom and that my mom had taken 14 bottles of pills that evening and she had tried to kill herself. This was before I even talked to the officers. The hospital also advised me that my mother had told the EMT workers and the hospital, the ER hospital personnel, that she was being held against her will and was being trapped in the basement of my parents' home. So I give them my phone number. I ask them to please start corresponding with me so that I can, I will be coming in tomorrow. At this point, I believe it was like 11 o'clock at night when this was all going on. So I surely couldn't come at 11 o'clock at night. You can't go into the hospital then anyway. And they were working on my mom. She was safe. She was protected. There was security there. So after I hung up at the hospital, I called 911 again. Yes. 911 again, because how else are you going to get hold of the police at that time of night? The radio room is not open. So you have to call 911 again. Now, hours had gone by at this point. Silence, no updates, no reassurance, nothing. And they knew that I was the reason why they were dispatched. They knew it because I told the 911 operator who I was, what my relationship was. The police knew who I was based on my family and everything that's happened. So I don't understand why they didn't call me back. So after making that call back to 911, they finally called me back. And what they told me made my stomach drop. My mother had been found impaired after taking the 14 bottles of pills, sitting propped up on a bed. Well, literally on a bed that was being propped up by paint cans, but it was sitting on that bed. Okay. She was downstairs in the basement. They found the empty medication bottles, and she had tried to end her life that night. Now, let me bring up the point. As you know from the previous podcasts, and if you had the opportunity to read my book, Rescuing Mom, my mom had severe mental health issues. And this was the fourth time in my lifetime that I'm aware of that my mom tried to commit suicide. But even then, I was not told by the officers that she was being held in the basement. Notice I'm scratching my head. That wasn't done on purpose. My head just happened to be itchy at that point, but I did scratch my head. I got to be honest with you. I was not told that she was being abused. Nope. I was not told what really happened in great detail. No. And one of the officers even had the audacity, yes, I'm using the word audacity, to say to me that my mother was living her best life in the basement. Okay. So let me get this straight. She was trapped in the basement. They didn't say anything about that. They didn't say anything about the sewage. They didn't say anything about the mold. They didn't say anything about the water not running, that there wasn't a toilet running, that there wasn't a sink in the bathroom there that was working properly. They didn't say anything about the construction that was all in the basement that was done illegally that they could see. Yeah, they didn't say anything about any of those things. Nothing. So I, being me, I knew something wasn't right. This just doesn't seem right to me. Why would my mom be in the basement? Why would she be in her on her bed, i.e. her room, in the basement next to the washer and dryer? Because that's where they had her that originally. Yeah, we'll get to more of that later, but I just wanted to let you know that's where they had her. Right there where the sewage would back up, right out of the ground. So I hang up with the officers. I immediately get into my computer. I write an email to my personal attorney. This attorney of mine is amazing. I will not say who he is because he is a celebrity attorney. He's very well regarded in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and throughout the United States, especially in DC. So I felt comfortable that I was in good hands. So I sent an email letting him know that this is what was going on. And I felt that we needed to get a power of attorney. And if the police weren't going to protect my mother, I would. Okay. I would. The next morning, I called the Office of Aging and Domestic Violence in Chester County. They're two different offices. I demanded an investigation commence immediately, like that day. My attorney drafted a power of attorney so that I could advocate for my mother while she was in the hospital and for any other reasons that she would want me to do so. Okay. Because this is a crime. I knew this was a crime. Going into this, before I even went to the hospital, that next day, I knew this was a crime. Okay. I felt it. So later that day, I go to the hospital. This is the first time I'd seen my mom since 2018. And I'm at the hospital, I don't know, 10 minutes or so. And who walks in blatantly was my nephew, Christopher Roos, who was living at the house with my mom with a backpack on. Why a backpack? What was in the backpack? At that time, I did not even have the bandwidth to think through the backpack. I really didn't. Got to be honest with you. All right. My only thought was get him away from my mother, get him away from my mother. And also, was the second voice that we heard, that my sister-in-law heard on the phone, where was he? Was he at the hospital too? And I just don't know who he is. I don't know. So I became very angry. I yelled for the nurse to get security. Yelled. Oh yeah, I did not leave my mom's side. I yelled from where I was standing for the nurse because she was right outside the nurse's station because she tried to kill herself the night before. So now she's on watch. There's a person sitting outside my mom's door with a computer 24/7. Okay. That person is seeing all this go on. They do in fact call security, and security removes Christopher. I make sure to tell the hospital again that Christopher Roos is not allowed to come to my mother's room. Nope. not allowed. And anybody that calls the hospital to find out my mother's medical well-being, because there were several calls that had been made since last night by the perpetrators trying to inquire as to what happened to my mom. Is it because they were worried that she was going to die and that they would be held accountable? Was it the latter, which was they were worried that they are now going to get in trouble because she is going to tell people that she is being trapped in the basement? So I contact East Pikeland Police Department again. I asked to speak with the same officer who helped get my mom out of the basement the night before. I told them they needed to come and interview my mother immediately, but the Department of Aging had already started their investigation earlier that day and had taken my mother's statement. Now it is time for law enforcement to start doing their damn job. Okay. In my mind, this is what I'm thinking. Okay. I'm going to be honest, very honest. And I have not talked about this. I have kept it very quiet. If you read my book, you'll get a gist of some of these things there. So the officer came. He heard my mother say to him she was being held against her will, that they were taking her money, that they locked her in the basement. They were taking my dad's pension. They were taking my dad's Social Security. They were using her SNAP benefits, that she didn't have any food to eat, that she was given a Mountain Dew. She didn't have coffee. She didn't have a shower. She didn't have a toilet. She was forced to use a bathroom that they were making in the basement, and they would take the sewage from the toilet that she would use because it didn't work. They would take the sewage out of the toilet, in a bucket, and carry it out of the house and bring it to the front of the house and throw it in the sewer in the pipe in the front yard. Okay? This was the beginning. Okay. The police officer asked that I write the formal statement for my mom because my mom was unable to. She was recovering from what had happened to her. She was also diagnosed with additional things as a result of being abused in the basement. So then the investigation finally began. So the officer told me that I needed to obtain 2 protection from abuse orders, otherwise known as PFAs. One for perpetrator David Frame and one for Christopher Roos. At this time, we know who's at the house. The next morning, I went straight to the Chester County Courthouse. The judge reviewed everything, and after speaking with the investigating officer, the PFAs were granted. From there, things moved really fast to that point. When I brought the PFAs to the East Pikeland Police Station, they believed they had enough evidence to obtain a search warrant for my mother's home. They advised me that they would get the search warrant, that I was to have someone to change the locks at the house because I would need to take the house over, and that I would need to evict them formally, both Christopher and David. I would need to write an eviction letter, at which time I did. I surely did. No problem. They also got a copy of the power of attorney that was executed by my mom. So they now, Christopher and David Frame, knew that I was there and that I was now starting to deal with these problems that they were causing. That evening, East Pikeland Police Department executed the warrant. My name was included in the warrant because I was the one who initiated everything, the 911 call, the investigation, the protection orders. So I had to be listed in the warrant. Christopher and David were removed from the house, and the code enforcement and child youth services participated in the raid. Why child youth services, you might ask? Well, there's a funny thing that was going on. David Frame had his children living upstairs above my mom, attending Phoenixville area schools illegally. He wasn't paying taxes to the school district. There was no legitimate lease that my mom signed with him so that he could put his kids in school. So bills were just simply mailed to the house to create the illusion of an active address so the children could be enrolled. The same schools that Christopher went to, where my dad was paying taxes so that Christopher could go, and the same schools that my brother and I went to. Because let me remind you, this was the house that I grew up in, and so did my brother. And this was the same house that Christopher Roos grew up in, even though he lied during his sentencing about 2 months ago, I think. I think it was 2 months ago. Yes, it was September. He lied to the court and said that he at one point was homeless and that he was living with my brother, and he was not. He was living in this house the entire time until he finally was kicked out. Okay? That's the truth of the matter. So, meanwhile, I would later learn by talking to the neighbors that David Frame's children had been bullying a child next door, and that child was so scared that that child couldn't even go on the bus. So when I kicked them out and the children had to leave, the neighbors, all the neighbors on both sides, were relieved for them to leave. That is how bad all of this was. And I'm not even getting into the parts about how they messed up the house and the backyard with the dead chickens yet. That'll come later, okay? I'm just telling you about the preliminary things that I discovered, okay? The night that the house was taken back. The night I took the house back with the authority. So this wasn't just elder abuse. Okay. This was a web of exploitation, manipulation, and criminal activity that had been unable to continue because had been able to continue for quite some time because no one intervened. No one knew what was going on until I finally figured it out, thanks to my sister-in-law. If in fact she hadn't heard that phone call, I don't know what would have happened that night. Would my mother have died from all those pills that she took? Who knows? And if she had died, what would they have done? Would they have called 911 or would they have disposed of the body? I have no idea. Okay. No idea. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know, but I'm just bringing all these points up because it's really important. Okay. It's really important to talk about. The truth about all this is very painful. And that is why I wrote Rescuing Mom, to document the truth, to expose what happened, to make sure no one else experiences the same failures and the same negligence, the same pain, the same expenses. And I mean expenses because I've had to pay for all this. I'm still paying lawyers' fees. Okay. Because I still have to have people to represent me because there's still things going on. If you want to read the full account, the investigation and everything that unfolded after the warrant, you can find everything in Rescuing Mom, and you could purchase the book on Amazon or with my publisher, Book Baby. You can go on their website, or you can go on my website, ChristinaDiArcangelo.com, and there is a link to my book so that you could buy it. This is just part one of the story. Okay. In our next episode, I'll walk you deeper into the investigation, into parts of the aftermath, and into the long-term effects of elder abuse to the victim and on the family forced to pick up the pieces. Yeah. I want this to be a series that serves as an awareness campaign, a warning and a message of empowerment for anyone caring for an elder. If something feels wrong, if something doesn't add up, if something in your heart tells you the person's not safe, do not ignore it. Do not wait. Do not hope that someone else will step in. You cannot depend on anyone else. You need to be their advocate. You need to be their voice. You need to be their protector. Thank you for listening to Humanitarian Horizons. This is Christina DiArcangelo, and I will see you in part 2. Ta-ta for now.